Okay, let's see the show. Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Dhammaya.
Namo Dhammaya.
Namo Sanghaya.
Namo Sanghaya.
Namo Namah.
Namo Namah.
Om.
Om.
Hum.
Hum.
So it's Wednesday, it's 7 o'clock, it must be Sangha Night. So welcome everybody, welcome to those of you tuning in from home and to all of you here in the shrine room as well. Before I start, I'll just say we're recording tonight's session. We're doing that because some of you will know Tony Cullen. He's in hospital at the moment, nothing in there for about a week, expecting to get home. But he's just likes things to listen to. I saw him yesterday and he likes things to listen to. So I thought we'd record this and then let him tune in. So you'll hear this. So hello, Tony. You can all say hello, Tony, if you. Hello. There you go. And you can bear him in mind in your Mudita Bhavana as well. For a good recovery. So we're in the middle of a series on the Brahma Viharas, which is a set of meditations. So for those of you who are very new, it's basically a set of meditations around the Metta Bhavana. They're sort of an exploration of the Metta Bhavana, of, different sort of ways in which loving kindness can manifest. So we've had 2 talks so far, one which was on Metta, the Metta Bhavana itself. And then last week, Sradhamani talked about the Karuna Bhavana, which is the second of the 4, which means cultivation of compassion. When loving kindness, that sort of other regarding, really wishing well of another being, when that meets someone who's suffering, then it will naturally manifest as compassion. This evening, I'll be talking about the 3rd one, which is the Mudita Bhavana. And Mudita means, it's translated as sympathetic joy, but it means sort of being happy at other people's happiness. Okay, it's having that sort of resonance, a sort of resonant joy, you could say. Next week we'll have the Upeksha Bhavana, which will come next week, and all will be explained next week. So Mudita Bhavana is what happens when loving kindness comes into contact with somebody who is happy. So before I go into Mudita Bhavana specifically, I just wanted to say a bit about them generally, these 4 meditations. I suppose the first thing to say, they're called the Brahma Viharas, which means something like the divine abodes. These are divine ways of living. They're quite elevated, and really, if you practice them, they're quite blissful. The Karaniya Metta Sutta, which is the words of the Buddha, concludes with like saying, well, practice this, and it's like being in heaven already, here and now, not waiting until you die. You can sort of do it here and now. And the Brahma Viharas are the way of doing this. Sometimes they're called the 4 immeasurables. I mean, I haven't looked this up, but to my mind, that suggests, well, there's just something unbounded about metta and about these forms of metta. When we're not in metta, when we're in more sort of self-referential states of mind, then that's sort of finite. It's sort of constricted. But metta, real metta, to the extent that we can really practice metta or the other Brahma Viharas, they're boundless. There's no sort of edge to them. Anything that's ego-based has an edge, which is ourself. But once we go beyond that, then there's no limit. There's absolutely no limit. So that's why I think they're called the immeasurables. And you could say that when we're in a state of metta, if it's really sort of true love and kindness, true metta, that in a way we're not ourselves anymore. We're already something sort of bigger. That our whole sort of structure of consciousness has expanded, to include, at least one other person, and preferably all other beings. And perhaps even just for moments we can get a feeling of what that's like. In a way, just sort of dropping this self-preoccupation that we normally sort of walk around with. So it's a very strong thing. It's a really strong practice. After years of years of being at the Buddha Center, you can begin to think of, we do these two very basic practices of the Metta Bhavana and the mindfulness of breathing. They're the sort of beginners things, they're the sort of starter things. But actually, they're immeasurable. They're extremely powerful and transformative. It's said that with the Metta Bhavana, in a way, if you just practice that would lead you to complete liberation. So they're very, very strong practices. Also, just acting from that. Every time we act from metta, then something sublime is coming into the world. Even something as trivial as letting someone in front of you in the car or on an escalator or wherever it might be. Just that simple act is sort of saying that this world isn't all about me. And we do that hopefully through our days. But every time we do that, we're bringing something divine, sublime, immeasurable into the world. Let's do more, I suppose. So that's just something about the Brahma Viharas generally. Although, one other thing I wanted to say. There's something about this particular set, in fact, particularly about last week's and this week's. So last week we looked at compassion, Karuna Bhavana, and this week it's Mudita Bhavana. Years ago, the first time I did this practice, I went on a meditation retreat, which was just focused on the four Brahma Viharas. And I hadn't been meditating for all that long. And the Mudita Bhavana came as quite a revelation to me. It's like somehow I thought that metta was all about compassion. I thought that metta was all about, sort of seeing another person, seeing their suffering, being kind, and sort of finding kindness towards that. I thought that, I don't know if you'd asked me whether I would have said that, but that was my experience of it. So when I was taught to do the Mudita Bhavana, it was just, you can do this as well with your Metta Bhavana. You can actually sort of resonate with other people's happiness, with other people's strengths and so on. And I realised that in a way, the Brahma Viharas have got they're like a sort of calibration. It was probably just my particular sort of character and propensity was to orient towards suffering and problems. I guess for other people, there are other people who are the other way, who just see the positives all the time. So, if you've got a sort of bias towards just seeing the negative and the problematic and the painful, or if you've got a bias towards just seeing the nice things, the happy things, then doing the Brahma Viharas kind of balances you. Yeah? It means that you're sort of gives you the ability to hold both. That strikes me as really important, that we do have this sort of balance, that we're able to meet both of those, as it were, quite equally. We've probably all come across people who sort of relate to you. Think about what it's like being on the receiving end. People that relate to you and sort of say, you're right. And, if you ever need someone, they sort of oriented towards your difficulties and problems, which is sometimes very nice, if you've got difficulties and problems. But sometimes you just want to say, I'm fine, actually. Let's just be happy here, Likewise, you might have been on the receiving end and when people have sort of kind of happy towards you and sort of respond in that sort of way. But actually, you've got stuff going on and it's just, actually, can I talk about this as well? But it doesn't feel quite right or something. Yeah, having a balance of karuna capability and mudita capability and not sort of being biased. Seems like a good thing to be able to offer. A good thing to offer in the context of friendship and a good thing to offer the world as well, I think. So they've got this sort of calibrating effect. So now coming on to mudita. So as I say, mudita is what happens when loving kindness, metta, meets someone who's, well, happy. Often it's also, people who've got the qualities that bring them happiness. So often this sort of applies not just to someone's sort of current mood. If they've got good qualities, qualities that are actually the conditions for happiness, then mudita would extend to that as well. So sometimes it's about qualities, but it also might be just, that they've won a few grand on the lottery and, you being happy for them. Well, it's just ordinary happiness as well. It's about responding to that as well. So I suppose the question is, what really happens? If you come across somebody who's just really in a good state, someone who's really just sort of happy and enjoying life, and perhaps they're just quite fortunate, they've got, life is going well for them. What actually happens, and hopefully, if you've been doing the Metta Bhavana, that you're just sort of naturally that you're happy for them. Good for you, sort of thing. But sometimes other things get in the way, say jealousy, or being a bit cynical about someone, sort of thinking, oh, well, yeah, they're happy, but what's really going on? I bet there's some real suffering underneath, or, whatever, that sort of, almost looking for something negative. That's one of the far enemies. So a way that we have of talking about these, the Brahma Viharas, that each of them has a far enemy and a near enemy. It seems a bit strange to think of empathetic, sympathetic joy as having an enemy. but you get the idea that there's something that's sort of opposing it, an opposing force. So that jealousy would be the obvious far enemy. It's an obvious enemy. It's the very opposite of sympathetic joy, of mudita. Well, why is it an enemy? I suppose it just blocks mudita from happening. If you bound up with jealousy, then mudita can't find a way in. It also occurs to me it's sort of the other way round, is that mudita is the enemy of jealousy. You can imagine this outside a pub somewhere, sort of slugging it out, And it strikes me that actually mudita is more powerful. That, once you sort of let mudita in, then it will sort of banish jealousy. It's because it's immeasurable. It's just more powerful. So that's the far enemy. The near enemy, again, we sort of alluded to this a couple of weeks ago, the near enemy. So a near enemy is something that in a way gets in the way through being so close to it that it's mistaken for it, or something like that. A near enemy of mudita is a sort of vicarious satisfaction at someone's good qualities or at someone's good fortune. A couple of instances here is one that you sort of put someone on a pedestal a bit. You sort of, oh yeah, they're such a good person, such a good person. It gives you a certain sort of good feeling about the world or something. That there's this good person and I know them. They're over there, and that's good. But you're not really taking them in as a person because you put them on a bit of a pedestal. You're not really sort of seeing the whole of them. There isn't that sort of sense of really just wishing them well as a human being. It's from that you might get a sense that if someone is generally admired and you're a friend of them, then it's sort of this sort of reflected glory. Last time I was in India, a lot of people spoke very highly of Jyotipala because Jyotipala spent a lot of time in India and did amazing things, like establishing Buddhist centres and so on, and he's still very much loved in the sort of Buddhist community in India. So he came up in conversation, and people would sort of say very good things about him. And I have to admit, I felt a certain, oh yes, he's a very good friend of mine. I did sort of, you get this sort of reflected glory. So that's not to say that's the whole of my reaction. I also feel genuine mudita towards Jyotipala's good qualities. I hope somewhere in there. So the problem with that is that, you might think you've got mudita when actually it's just something a bit more ego-based. That's the problem. So again, we need to actually, what do we need to do if we're doing that is to actually see that person as a human being and genuinely wish them well, as a human being, not just for whatever you sort of get from being associated with them or whatever. Yeah, I'm just going to say a couple of things about mudita in action. Sort of mudita applied in everyday life. It's sort of related to these near enemies, I suppose, or far enemies. One way in which I think mudita can help, in which you can consciously sort of use Mudita Bhavana as a tool, is if you're in a situation of conflict with somebody. Obviously, what happens, or all too often happens, if you're in conflict with someone, then your mind rehearses that person's shortcomings and bad qualities. It just homes in on the things they've done that you don't like and their bad qualities, and you start sort of rehearsing them over and over in your mind, and they get bigger and bigger in your mind, and the conflict therefore gets more and more difficult to resolve, and so on. So what can we do? Do the Mudita Bhavana. It might take a bit of work. But everybody has got something. Everybody's got some seed of goodness in them. So look for it. Even if it's just, they've got the potential. Do you know what I mean? They've got the potential for kindness. It's in there somewhere. More often than not, actually, they're not that difficult to find, unless you're with someone quite extreme. You can always find someone's sort of good qualities. And, maybe that can just sort of dispel, it can sort of interrupt that sort of cycle of homing in and getting this very, very biased sort of feeling towards somebody. I remember years ago, a particular instance where this came up, and I was talking to, actually it was Nanda Vajra, it's quite a few years ago, and sort of moaning about person X. And Nanda Vajra actually made a point. He said, but they just started listing their good qualities. And of course, I always wanted to say, but, that. Actually, eventually he wore me down and sort of, okay, think about that. So that's quite a good thing to bear in mind. That if anyone starts moaning to you about a third person, rather than colluding in it, rather than reinforcing it, the worst thing we can do is reinforce it. The other thing we can do is sort of nod our heads. But the best thing we can do is actually draw their attention to the person's good qualities. Get some mudita going. Yeah, mudita is just, it's powerful in a way in those sort of situations. You could even say on a world scale, when the media are telling us that a certain country is evil, or a certain race or a certain country is evil, counter it. Years ago, was it the Police or was it just Sting had this song called "The Russians Love Their Children Too," and it was around about the end of the Cold War, and I think, bless him, our Sting from the world's end, I think he did his bit there. I think he did his bit, just sort of saying the Russians love their children too. So that's one way of sort of mudita in action, sort of using it as a tool. Another way is perhaps in that situation where someone's got good qualities, but I don't know which of the enemies is this, or whether I've just made this one up, but it's where you're attracted to someone's good qualities and you sort of want them for yourself. So this is in the area of sort of polarized attraction. So, you come across another person, and either you sort of see the qualities that they've got, whether they're just sort of good looking, or they look like they embody nobility or strength or playfulness or some sort of good quality. And what happens is that we can polarize, and we can get into this sort of situation where we think, I haven't got that, they have, I want that person in my life, okay? So that can be either an emotional attraction, or of course it can also be the sort of driving force of a kind of sexual attraction as well. In a way, mudita can counteract that, or can kind of be quite a good counterbalance to that, in that one is sort of cultivating a habit of sort of more like a good for you sort of habit, that when you see that quality, whether it's real or projected, doesn't matter, when you sort of see that in another person, instead of sort of getting into this whole sense of sort of lack in yourself and so on, having more a sort of, well, good for you, really good for you. And it can just sort of stop that whole polarisation thing from happening. I personally have found this down the years quite a useful thing, both from times when I've got situations, especially where they're unrequited. In a way, it gives you back your sort of self-respect, I suppose. But even just on public transport or something, sitting on the metro and you see someone who's very attractive, and you can very quickly sort of do that thing. Oh God, I've got to have that person in my life, and blah blah blah. And all of this sort of happens. Yeah. But actually, if you can just stop yourself and just sort of say, "Oh, look at that person! Isn't that fantastic?" Who knows what's really going on? But in our mind, they look sort of like they're having the time of their lives. They look like they've got all these sort of good qualities, carefree and so on. Yeah. Just think, good. May you be happy. Enjoy your youth and good looks. Just have a great time. Have a great, and that can just sort of release us from all of that more self-bound kind of response. And it also sort of liberates that sense that, well, any good quality, if it's a sort of Buddha quality, any quality like sort of strength and joy, kindness, wisdom, playfulness, there's nothing that we can't cultivate in ourselves. There's nothing in there. There's no sort of, none of those qualities that are inaccessible to us. So if you do sort of see someone who's got those sort of qualities, just think, gosh, yeah, I could be a bit more like that, couldn't I? Not out of a sense of lack, but out of a sense of sort of self-empowerment, in a way. So, that's my addition to the list of ways of working with Mudita Bhavana. And it's just a much sort of happier state. Likewise, I think when you get to a certain age, you just sort of see a lot of young people around, having enjoying their lives, hopefully. A lot of them, not all of them, a lot of them just seem to be having a nice time, enjoying their lives and so on. And we're just, I think, to those of us who are a certain age, who are sort of not in that stage of life anymore, just having a sort of sense of happiness for younger people, you know what I mean? Just that sort of sense of, enjoy your youth, make the most of it, live a great life, that sort of sense. There's a novel by, what's he called? Kazuo Ishiguro, guy that won the Nobel Prize last year, sort of British, bit of Japanese origin. But he wrote a novel called The Artist of the Floating World, which was all about Japan and so on. But the main character at the end, he's lived this life, traced from the Second World War right through to current day, when the book was published. And he's been through all sorts of ups and downs and so on, through the whole history of that time has sort of affected him in different ways. But the novel ends with him just sort of sitting in Shinjuku or whatever, in the middle of Tokyo, just with these crowds, and he just sort of sees all these young people sort of swirling around him, and he just says, well, I just wish you well. That's the end point that he comes to in his life as an old man. It's just, I just wish you well. I just wish you well. And it made quite an impression on me, that. I thought it was just one of the best endings for a novel that I've ever read. It's just someone in a sort of that state of well-wishing. Okay, so that's a bit about sort of mudita in action. So what I think I'll do, might be time for some questions. But before we do that, I'm just going to say, after the break, we'll do a period of the Mudita Bhavana. And there's a particular way of doing it, which is very like the Metta Bhavana, but not quite. And it's got 6 stages. So the first stage is just the same as the first stage of the Metta Bhavana. It's just metta towards yourself. Just ordinary love and kindness towards yourself. Okay, so that's stage 1. But in the second stage, you bring to mind somebody who you know who has good qualities or is just happy, a happy person or someone whose qualities you sort of look up to. And just extend metta towards them. And what will hopefully happen is that your metta will manifest as mudita. Okay? But you don't have to think mudita, it's just that will arise in that second stage. And then in the third stage, it's like the rest of the Metta Bhavana. You think of another friend who's got a kind of average amount of happiness, another sort of friend, and then a neutral person, then a difficult person, and then the world. Okay, but by this time you're looking for that quality of mudita specifically. Okay? That's the traditional form of the Mudita Bhavana. But I'll lead it through now. That's the sort of structure that you sort of start off doing metta, but then through bringing to mind, someone who's got these good qualities, you sort of get a feel for that manifesting as mudita, and then you sort of extend that through the other stages.